Hi everybody, we're going to pick up with integumentary system and functions or physiology of the skin. So if you're following me in the course pack, I'm on page 60. These are the four functions that we're going to talk about today in more detail. We're going to talk about how skin forms the first line of defense. We're going to talk about the role of skin in synthesizing vitamin D. We will also talk about the skin's role in sensory reception and communication. And then we'll wrap up this information with a discussion of the regulation of body temperature. So first, think about what life would be like without skin. You would have no barrier against the environment around you. In fact, you would dry out because skin helps to keep you from losing your fluids to the environment. Also, anything in the environment, from viruses to bacteria, would be able to enter your soft and moist tissues. So we think of skin as providing a first line of defense against invasion and a protective barrier against microbes. So how do we do that? Well, let's first look at oil and sweat produced by glands in your skin. Oil that is produced by sebaceous glands, that is acidic in nature, and that inhibits or impairs microbe growth on your skin. Now, you do have a natural supply of bacteria that live on your skin anyway, but we don't want an overabundance of them. We also don't want new microbes taking hold and growing on our skin. Sweat can also be inhibitory to microbes because it happens to be salty. So the combination of oil and sweat help to prevent microbes from entering our skin. Second, keratin is waterproofing. This helps to create a dry outer surface to our skin and also helps to create a barrier against microbes. Third, the fact that we have a thick stratum corneum means that there are multiple layers in the outermost layers of our epidermis. That in and of itself creates a barrier against microbe invasion. And then finally, Langerhans cells or dendritic cells that are found in the epidermis. They also help to eat or consume microbes so that they do not make their way further into the lower levels of our skin. All right, so just a couple of things here to look at. We've got multiple layers in our epidermis. In fact, stratum corneum here has around 15 to 30 layers, so we know that epidermis does provide a protective boundary. It is keratinized, of course. We also look at melanin as providing protection, not against microbes per se, but against damage to the lower levels of skin, such as from UV radiation. You might recall that those melanocytes are found here in the lower levels of our epidermis, and that skin darkening pigment known as melanin travels up toward the apical surface every time we're exposed to that UV radiation. It takes around 2 to 4 weeks for that melanin to reach the topmost layers. Langerhans cells are seen here. They are, of course, white blood cells that help to consume or eat bacteria. That prevents bacteria from traveling further down toward the dermis. If we reach down here in the dermis, there is a blood supply, and those microbes can then travel in the bloodstream. A second major function of the skin is the synthesis of vitamin D. Specifically, it's vitamin D3, known as calcitriol. Calcitriol is important for bone metabolism. In order to store calcium and phosphorus to our bones, we must have an adequate level of vitamin D3. Now, there's a couple of ways you can get it. One, you can sit in the sun for about 10 to 15 minutes a day, and that will give you the necessary amount of calcitriol in order to do bone metabolism. In other words, in order to store calcium and phosphorus to your bones. If you don't have access to the sun or can't sit in the sun, then we look at milk products like you see here as a way to obtain our natural amounts of vitamin D3. The skin also serves as a sensory receptor. In fact, there's lots of sensory receptors in our skin, and it tells us what's going on in the world around us. The sensory receptors in our skin can detect touch, pressure, pain, and temperature. So what we're going to do is talk about, the ones that you're seeing here. Meissner corpuscles that detect touch and pressure, lamellated receptors which detect deep pressure, and Ruffini corpuscles which detect pressure and distortion of the skin. So let's say that we have a mosquito land on our arm, a very light touch. Which one of these three types of sensory receptors do you think senses that mosquito's landing? Well, that would be a Meissner corpuscle. fine touch is detected through those kinds of corpuscles. Likewise, Meissner corpuscles can also detect vibrations through the skin. If you feel a roll of thunder or the bass beat of loud music, you can detect that through your skin through these Meissner corpuscles. People who are hard of hearing can also detect sounds through their vibrations through these corpuscles. The next kind there, a lamellated receptor, you'll notice has somewhat of a rounded shape. In fact, it looks somewhat like an onion cut in half. These lamellated receptors are deep pressure receptors. If you're having a tooth that's extracted, it may feel like a deep push into your jaw. That would be a lamellated receptor picking up on that sensation. If you have a dog bite your arm, that deep pressure you feel would be the lamellated receptor's job to pick up on that sensation. Finally, here we have Ruffini corpuscles. It is their job to pick up on, again, pressure, but also distortion of the skin. You'll notice how they look like tree roots scattered throughout the skin. So think about if you have skin that is about to tear. Maybe you have something pulling on your skin that's making it stretch. These types of corpuscles will actually tell your brain that the skin is preparing to stretch to the point of tearing. And as we know, the epidermis can heal itself quickly, but that underlying dermis is not able to heal quickly. That's why it's bad news if we end up tearing or ripping our skin. So if you fall and skin your knee, for instance, that stretch or distortion that occurs with the scrape, then that can be detected by one of these Ruffini corpuscles. So here's a whole list of the types of receptors we've got in the skin. Keep in mind we're focusing on Meissner corpuscles. Pacinian corpuscle is the lamellated one, and Ruffini's corpuscles. Just another look at one of these Meissner corpuscles. They picked up on light touch, pressure, and just and the vibrations that you may feel from, say, loud music. Really cool look here at a lamellated corpuscle. You can see that if it's depressed or pushed on, that it would send off a nerve impulse, the sensation of deep pressure in the skin. So our final function here is body temperature regulation. You'll notice on your worksheet that normal body temperature hovers around 98.6 or 37 degrees Celsius. Now, of course, that varies from person to person. In fact, my normal body temperature is around 97 point something. So we find that the body temperature varies, the normal level varies from person to person. Now, we're going to talk about the role of sweat glands in just a moment, but I do want to introduce this concept to you. There are vessels in the dermis of our skin. Keep in mind the epidermis is avascular. And these vessels can actually help us get rid of extra heat if we need to, or help us retain more heat if that's what we need to do. So the top picture here shows what happens when we're too hot. When we're too hot, our vessels in the dermis will vasodilate. That means they get larger in size and allow for us to radiate and lose more heat. However, when we're too cold, we want to keep all the heat we have. So those vessels in the dermis will constrict. That allows us to shunt that warm blood to the vital organs. In those cases, you may have your skin appear somewhat blue or even feel cold to the touch. So vasoconstriction is a response of our skin's vessels when we're too cold. So let's talk about what happens when we're too cold. We'll cover that one first. All right, so when you're too cold, sweat glands remain inactive. There is no need for sweat glands to produce sweat. You may recall the function of sweat is to do what? Sweat helps us cool down. So when it evaporates off the skin surface, it leaves with a cooled feeling. So no need to activate those sweat glands when you're too cold. The muscles in your body will start to shiver to produce heat. It's an involuntary response to being too cold. You can't stop yourself from shivering unless you warm your body up. Vasoconstriction is shown in this picture. That means that vessels constrict, preventing the loss of heat. So sometimes our skin may appear blue due to the lack of oxygen traveling to those upper regions of skin. So in fact, a bruise may appear blue, and again, that's caused by the deprivation of oxygen to that particular area. Arrector pili muscles are attached to the bases of these hairs, and of course they will stand those hairs straight on end. That also helps us trap heat closer to the body. So you may not realize it, but if you look down and see goosebumps on your arm, that is all part of helping to retain heat closer to your body. And here you can see that Arrector pili muscle right here. Like we've talked earlier, it is an involuntary muscle that helps to stand hairs on end. Literally translated, Arrector means to stand straight. Pili means hair. So the name implies what it does. It does stand hairs straight on end when either you're cold or when you're scared. Let's talk about what happens when you're too hot. Well, when you're too hot, you need to have those sweat glands activate. And of course, we need that sweat to escape onto the skin surface, and it evaporates. That evaporative cooling is what gives us a sense of being cooled when we can sweat in a dry environment. Now, in the South, a really warm, moist environment makes it difficult for that sweat to evaporate. So on a hot, humid day, you're going to feel even hotter because that sweat cannot evaporate off your skin surface. So, eccrine sweat glands activate when you're hot. You'll notice here vasodilation occurs. That means that these vessels in the dermis can open up, increasing blood flow to the upper regions of your skin. That will allow for the heat to radiate off. In fact, your hot skin may appear red in color because of the increased flow of oxygen to that area. So just as a side note, I thought you would be interested in knowing this. If you live your life in the South, then you have more vessels in the upper regions of your dermis. That's all about helping you cool off. So this picture would be how your skin would look. If you live your life in a cold northerly environment, like say up in Canada, then your body will grow less vessels in the upper regions of your dermis. Why do you think that is? Well, it's about maintaining blood flow toward the vital organs. So in a cold environment, you simply have less vessels toward the skin surface. Now, if you are from the South and you've lived here your whole life, if you've spent a winter in a cold environment like Chicago or New York, everyone else may be able to handle it just fine, but that may be the coldest winter of your entire life. So it takes at least a year's time for your body to adjust to a new environment and replace or grow new vessels in different areas. So the first winter you spend somewhere new, like a very cold environment, you're going to suffer because, of course, your body has not yet physiologically adjusted to that different type of temperature. Now, I did want to mention heat stroke. It's on the very bottom of your page. Heat stroke can occur when you no longer have enough fluids to lose. So if you no longer can sweat because you've lost all the fluids that you can possibly lose, then your body doesn't have one of its mechanisms for helping you cool down. So what do you think happens to body temperature when you can no longer sweat? When you can no longer sweat, your body temperature will continue to rise, okay? And that is what we consider to be heat stroke. When your body temperature rises 103, 104, it can keep going. You can denature your proteins if you reach as high as something like 108. So it's very important that you stay replenishing your fluids if you are out and working in a hot summer day. So heat stroke can occur when we no longer sweat and the body temperature continues to rise. So just a comparison here of how these vessels appear in the skin during hot and cold times. We can see that the vessels dilate to help increase heat loss, or they can constrict to reduce heat loss on a cold day. So make sure you spend some time studying this information. It's easy to get these two confused, and you'll want to make sure that you understand that vasodilation means the vessels increase the blood flow to the skin surface. That helps you lose heat, while vasoconstriction decreases blood flow to the skin surface. That helps you keep your heat.